As Russell had alluded to, the success of any organization really does depend on the quality of leadership and specifically the CEO. So let's talk about how we can develop leaders. And Laurie, if you can start off by telling us, how do you start developing high potential managers for future leadership roles?
I think that coaching is a really important part of that. So my background is neuroscience-based coaching, and having someone have coaching competencies, no matter what role they're in, is really important. So I believe in a coaching culture so that you can then shape that next generation or that next leadership team, so that you're preparing them and you're constantly preparing that next team and the next team. Because as you see, Microsoft's a great example, as you see the leadership needing to getting to a stalling point, we're not moving forward. Okay, who's that next person in the pipeline who's going to be ready for this? Who is the right candidate for the right time and for the needs that the company has today, right? Because it's about timing and about that diversity of what that person brings to the table to be able to shape them and to coach them to where they need to be. And so I think that a lot of training and coaching is really important to developing leaders and giving them the experience. So shadowing, I think, is another big component of it. And we do this with our students. We let them shadow executives. We let them shadow different roles that they want to maybe experience or try out. And so when a student actually shadows someone, that person, and you're choosing somebody that's a really good model because you want somebody that's going to really model the right characteristics that you're looking for and the right styles, and so that now when they see that, they make it their own. And we always teach that candidate to look at what are the things that you like about that leader, right? And how would you then make that part of your toolbox, right? How would you use that as a tool for yourself?
Andrew, can you provide some best practices around this? How do you develop a plan to help leaders and high potential managers into future leadership roles?
That there's no substitute for real responsibilities that they can actually succeed or fail at. So what happens at Venture for America a lot is we bring young people into startups that generally don't have high degrees of management structures. And they get line responsibilities very early on, and they'll sink or swim pretty rapidly. Now that sounds like very shoddy management, truthfully, and there's an element of that. But so there are three things. The first thing is that you cannot train someone to be a leader if they don't have the capacity to fail. Right. Like there's just no other way. And the only way they're going to have the capacity to fail is if they have real responsibilities and you're giving them like the real ability to screw up. Like there are no training wheels. It's like if they screw up, something's going to blow up. We're all going to deal with it. There's no other way. The second thing is that they're going to respond to how you manage them. And that's how they're going to treat their team. So if you say, hey, be a great manager, and then just like ignore them, they're naturally going to pattern match after you, and they're just going to ignore their people and just going to do. You have to pay a lot of attention to them in so far as like they're like the big pillars of what you need them to do. And the third thing is you need to instill in them the key values of like the principles that you want their decision making to revolve around. Because you're not going to be able to micromanage. If you do, they'll just micromanage. Your organization never grows in certain ways. You'll drive out quality people, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to give them like a few key pillars, being like, look, you're going to make decisions. I'm not going to be here. You're not going to get them all right. But here are like the three things that if you screw up, like I'm actually going to get upset about. The other things, I'm probably not going to care. But these three things, like, and so you just need to give them like a few key guideposts. And then the last thing is that if they're, if this is not the right fit for them, then you have to like call it early. In the sense that like I've had so many. As I was with Dan Gilbert, the founder of Quicken Loans, and he said something to me that stuck with me. It was like whenever I've thought that something wasn't going to work, anytime I've given it more time, it hasn't helped. And it's something he's like, all I've done is punish the person, punish the organization, like, and then I found myself. So I ran a for-profit company, and we had like a great run. Then I run a nonprofit now, and like I was pulling back on some of my proclivities, being like, well, like I guess we'll try and let things ride a little bit, and I come back to Dan's word. So like sometimes helping someone develop includes holding them to very high standards that like you have to put them in a position to succeed, and if it's not where they are, then you have to like make changes. That's, like you have to embrace that difficulty because it's one of like the most important things for the org and for them.
Yeah. Now, Irene, one of the key challenges is making sure leadership development is tied to business objectives. Tell us how that's done effectively.
So first, I think that's a quotable quote from Andrew. You can't have a leader who doesn't have a capacity to fail. Right? I think that's
it is.
incredibly
Absolutely.
important.
Yeah.
And I think in business, I've always been in for-profit Fortune 500 businesses, and it's kind of easy in business, right? To be able to, there are so many metrics, right? You've got top line, you've got bottom line, a whole bunch of managing inventory, all the rest of it. So it's easy at almost every level to give people great metrics, to develop them on that side of leadership and accountability, to deliver results and all that. The harder side is the soft side, which is just as important, especially if you're grooming people up the ranks, the soft side is the hard side. And very often, leaders forget in business to develop that. And then they get people who hit a wall because they've gone so far delivering the numbers, and they are not great organizational developers, not great organizational leaders. And I love to say about leaders, if you truly believe you're leading and you head out there and take that hill and no one follows you, you're just out for a walk. and so you have to have people go with you. And so to be able to develop that soft side in people that they're very organizationally empathetic, that they have a good ear, that they need to be able to gather all the strengths around them, is not measurable, but should be. So many of you probably in your companies use Bain's methodology of Net Promoter Score for your companies to see how you're doing, how many consumers will actually recommend your product. If you don't use it, it is a fabulous measure for how good your company will be in the long run. Net Promoter Scores, if you want a metric, Net Promoter Scores for people would be extraordinarily helpful. So it's about 360s. It's about figuring out how much of a followership your budding leaders have. You might not be able to tie revenue or ROI to it, but you should be able to measure people from the standpoint of, are they building followership? Could be in a very quiet way, and I'm not saying they have to be charismatic or loud or extroverted, but can they build a followership that will give momentum and a multiplier effect to the organization?
And that is one reason that organizations cite it's so difficult to recruit leaders, is because they really lack the soft skills that are needed to mobilize the troops, right? So Andrew, talk a little bit about that. What are some essential leadership skills and perspectives that are needed for leaders to be successful in the future?
Are you thinking specifically around millennials and young people, or like just general?
We'll get into millennials too, but if you could talk just generally.
So I'm just going to tell a story. So after Manhattan Prep was acquired by the Washington Post, I made a list of the problems that I was most animated by. And the single biggest problem I came to was that we had a ton of talent in this country doing things that were not that awesome, really. And so I thought, like, well, how do you change that? And so my idea was to recruit talented young people to work at early stage companies in Detroit, Baltimore, Cleveland, New Orleans, and other cities around the country. So it's a big idea. And so the question is, like, how do you make that happen? And so in my case, I said, well, like, no one's going to give me money if I don't put my own money in first. So I was like, hey, look, I'll pledge $120K and go without salary for a year to start this organization. And so I called friends, guilt tripped them, and was like, hey, don't you love America? Raised like 100,000 or so. So our budget was like 220. It's pretty modest in the scheme. And then I just went to campuses and like marched around. This year our budget's around $5.5 million. We're supported by UBS, PwC, Bank of America, Barclays, Reid Hoffman, Jeff Weiner, Dan Gilbert, like et cetera, et cetera. And the thing that I found people responded to is just that, like, if they can tell that you're driven by the right things, you're motivated to like just solve the problem, you know, like so much of what I think we're talking about with like these soft skills is really around commitment and character. you know, and like we frame character in like certain ways where it's like, hey, listen to people, like blah, blah, blah. Like, but so much of it's just like whether you care about the people around you and whether they can pick up on that. If you're driven by the right goals and you just care about hitting the goal and people can tell that's what you're about, then people will respond to that. And it's very hard in my experience to try and fake it. Like, you know, you can't fake it. So at Adventure for America, we had 1,400 applicants for 170 spots this past year. And so much of it's just about trying to figure out who's a good person. Like who's, you know, just we have like the no jerks rule and like we get very, very smart people, but like, you know, if we get a whiff of like entitled jerk, then you're out. And so, you know, and then that ends up creating a certain form of culture. So I think so much of what you're describing around like cultivating, it's like we think about it in terms of like skill. And I don't think that's that's the key driver in most of these situations. The key driver is like a strong culture, role modeling, and saying like, look, this is the kind of person we need. This is the kind of person we need you to be. We're going to reward that. And if you're not that, then this is not the right place for you. You have to like constantly be imposing that sort of culture in order to get the leadership you want at every level, in my experience.
Mm-hmm. So, Laurie, talk a little bit about what the drivers of some of these gaps are, be it skills, you know, the lack of culture that we're able to build. What are some of those leadership skills gaps what are the drivers of that?
Well, I think that the soft skills is a big part that we're challenged with, right? And it's all about, you know, biases and environment. And so finding that really good person is difficult today. And it's becoming more and more difficult because our society's kind of created this world. We're all part of it, right? We've just seen it in this election. And so how do we change? Change is hard. And how do we find those who are willing to fail?
Yes.
And they're okay with it. And this is part of our education system. It's in such a disruptive state, right?
High five.
So, you know, we're coaching teachers now to try, and when we do, they go, this is a luxury. We don't get this kind of training. You get it. It's folks in this room, you know, executives get coaching all the time. But why is it we wait till they're 25 years into their career to give them coaching training? Why aren't we giving teachers these competencies and these skills so they can then give it to their kids and their classes? And so if we want to change the world and change society, we have to start at a younger age. And we have to instill these foundational competencies that are international competencies. If you look at ICF, it's coaching competencies. They're standard competencies. Develop a trust in the conversation when you get first started. That's what a coach does, right? So how do you teach teachers to develop a trust with a student? Because we know through neuroscience that if a child is threatened or feels threatened in a classroom, what happens? They shut down. They do not learn. So if they've had a bad morning with their parents maybe yelled at them for something, their whole day's shot. They're not learning anything. And so you have to really understand, how are we instilling those foundations early? And reality is, neuroplasticity is here. So whether we've instilled them at a young age or not, it's still, is that person coachable? Can I shape them? Can I change them to make them into what they need to be successful? That can happen at any age, and I've seen it. The challenge with that is it's harder to do because the biases are already there. The environment has already shaped them. So unshaping it is really hard. Whereas it's like that piece of clay, right? If it's a big blob, I can make it into anything. But if it's already made into something, can I change it?